Story 1. My name is Alice, and last year I worked part-time as a DoorDash delivery driver in the small town of Bridgeport, Washington. I had another job at a clothing store in town, but on certain busy days I would actually make more money doing food deliveries due to so many people ordering takeout on those particular days. So on those days I'd spend most evenings driving around town doing deliveries. I had been doing this for almost 6 months at that point, and had gotten very familiar with the routine. Driving around Bridgeport making deliveries was just second nature to me. To make things even better, my town rarely had traffic, even during rush hour. It was a regular weeknight of delivering, around 7 p.m, on a Tuesday, if I remember correctly. I had just picked up a large sushi order from Sakura, the fanciest sushi restaurant in town, and began driving over to the customer's house on the other side of town. Big expensive orders like these were always the best to deliver. They paid more in tips and really didn't take any extra effort compared to smaller orders. So large orders from nice restaurants felt like hitting the jackpot. I pulled into the neighborhood of large, fancy homes known as Evergreen Acres. This made sense considering the size of the order and the fact that it was from an upscale restaurant. The neighborhood was known for having wealthy residents and huge houses hidden amongst the dense evergreen forests surrounding the area. As I checked the address, I saw the customer's house was on Canyon Drive, just a couple minutes into the neighborhood. Usually when I arrive at a house, I park on the street and walk up to the front door. But in Evergreen Acres, the houses were so far from the street, at the end of long winding driveways disappearing into the trees. So in neighborhoods like this, I would just drive down the long driveway to get closer to the houses. But as soon as I turned onto the driveway for this delivery, I slammed on the brakes. Right across the entrance was a large metal chain held up by 2 stone pillars on either side, completely blocking access. I had seen these decorative chains before on driveways in the fancy neighborhoods, but rarely were they actually connected across the entrance. I figured the homeowners must have just forgotten to undo it before ordering food, so I wasn't too worried initially. I parked my car and walked up to the pillar on the right side of the driveway to see if I could easily remove the chain. But when I got closer, I noticed there was a heavy padlock keeping the chain tightly secured between the 2 posts. This wasn't just a decorative chain. Someone had clearly intentionally closed off the driveway. I tugged on it in frustration, but knew there was no way I could get it opened without the key. I looked down the long, dark driveway, but couldn't even see a house from where I was standing. The driveway curved off into the dark, dense trees. Annoyed about the situation, I walked back to my car and grabbed my phone to call the customer. A man answered after the first ring, and I explained who I was and that I couldn't get down the driveway due to the chained entrance. The man responded in a friendly tone, "Oh yes, sorry about that. There's no easy way for me to unlock that chain from the house right now. But don't worry, the house isn't very far down the driveway at all. Just walk down the path, and it's not too long of a walk. You'll see it shortly." I pretended to still sound polite and pleasant on the phone and said, "Okay, sounds good." But after hanging up, I whispered to myself, typical rich snobs. Clearly, this guy didn't want to bother coming out to open his fancy gate and felt it was acceptable to make his delivery driver hike down his unlit wooded driveway instead, just to bring him his expensive sushi order. Annoyed, but not wanting a bad review, I grabbed the heavy bag of takeout and locked up my car. I walked around the locked chain and started down the dirt driveway path into the dark trees. About a minute into the walk, I started to feel a little nervous. It was really dark, with the tall trees blocking any remaining evening sunlight. And the homeowners didn't have any lights lining their long driveway, which I thought was pretty ridiculous. I still couldn't see any sign of the house, which I thought was strange considering the man had made it sound like the house was a short walk down the drive. Just then, I heard loud crunching footsteps approaching from the dark woods off to the left side of the driveway. I stopped dead in my tracks, gripping the bag of food tightly. As the footsteps got louder and closer, I stared intently into the trees trying to see who was approaching. A tall figure of a man suddenly emerged from the woods up ahead. He was lurking in the shadows of the trees, but I could tell he was facing me, slowly walking closer to the driveway. My heart started racing. Hello? Who's there? I called out, trying to hide the shakiness in my voice. The dark figure stepped onto the driveway, still slowly approaching. As he got closer, he raised his hand in a gesture of greeting. "It's me, the homeowner you just spoke to," the man called back in a sing-song tone. He continued walking toward me at a casual pace. I stood completely frozen, watching his advancing silhouette. As the man got closer, he stepped into a beam of moonlight shining through the trees, finally illuminating his face. I guess he was the customer I had spoken to, but it made no sense why he was coming from the woods instead of his house. The man walked right up to me, standing just a couple feet away on the dark wooded driveway. I was very unnerved having this stranger so close. "What are you doing out here?" I stammered, taking a small step back away from the man. "Oh, the driveway takes a sharp turn just up ahead, and it's actually quicker to cut through the woods to get to the house," he replied casually. "I figured I'd meet you halfway, since it's quite a long walk for you from the main road." His explanation made me feel even more unsettled. On the phone earlier, he had clearly said it was not a long walk to the house, and that I should stay on the driveway path. Now he was claiming the opposite, and emerging from the dark woods instead of his house. None of this added up at all, and alarm bells were ringing loudly in my head. The man was still standing uncomfortably close to me on the isolated driveway, but now had a cheerful, relaxed demeanor about him that seemed completely at odds with the tense situation. "Well, here is your food," I said with fake pleasantness, holding the bag out towards him. I just wanted to hand him the food and get back to my car as quickly as possible. "Why, thank you, miss," he replied politely, taking the bag from my hands. He peered down at the logo on the takeout bag and gave a satisfied smile. I hesitantly took a couple steps backward down the driveway, getting ready to bolt back to my car. But suddenly the man spoke again. "Oh, I almost forgot to bring your cash tip out here." He was still standing in the same spot, watching me with an intense stare. "Why don't you come with me through the woods shortcut? And once we're at the house, I'll make sure you get a nice big tip for all the trouble." The way he was looking at me while saying this made my stomach turn. His offer sounded completely absurd given the bizarre situation. "Oh, don't worry about it," I responded, continuing to back away from him. "I'll just head back to my car now. Have a good night." I whirled around and started speed walking back down the dark wooded driveway, wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. My car was parked so far away at the bottom of this endless driveway. I just prayed I could make it back without hearing him pursuing me. "It's just a quick stroll this way through the woods." The man called after me cheerfully. "Come along, and I'll drive you back to your car once we get your tip." I didn't dare respond or look back. I just kept hurrying down that dark driveway as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my ears. I heard the man's footsteps crunching leaves again, but it sounded like he was heading back into the woods away from me. I just kept moving forward, feeling relief wash over me once I finally made it back to my parked car at the chained entrance. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors immediately. As I sped off away from those woods, I realized my entire body was shaking in fear. I drove straight home, ending my delivery shift for the night. There was no way I was going back out on the roads alone after that. Once I got home, I quickly called the local police department to report the incident, in case this man tried luring any other women delivery drivers into the woods. The police operator documented all the details and said an officer would drive over to investigate the customer's house right away. I hardly slept at all that night, anxiously waiting for an update about what the police learned. A few hours later, an officer called me back, saying he had spoken to the residents living at that address. But oddly enough, the people living there claimed to have no idea what he was talking about. They insisted they hadn't ordered any food delivery that night. I have no idea if those homeowners were lying to cover for that creepy man I encountered on their property, or if that man didn't actually live at the house and had some other motive for being out there waiting in those dark woods. I quit doing delivery driving after that, only feeling comfortable going out again once I bought myself a can of pepper spray. But I still get chills thinking back to that night on the empty wooded driveway, face to face with a smiling stranger who seemed determined to get me into those dark woods. Story 2. It was just a regular night delivering pizzas around my hometown of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. I was in the middle of heading to probably my 8th or 9th house of the evening. I typically just play music and zone out as I drive between houses and the pizza shop, since it can get pretty mind-numbing after a while. But as I make my way down a dark, empty back road on the outskirts of town, I noticed a couple strange warning lights on my dashboard suddenly switched on. It was a little alarming, but they weren't anything too critical, so I just continued driving. My car was pretty old with a lot of miles on it, but it usually got me from point A to point B without many issues. I figured the warning lights must just be a minor false alarm or glitch. Unfortunately though, as I kept driving, more and more warning indicators began turning on. The check engine lights started flashing brightly before my car suddenly sputtered and came to a halt. I had never had a car break down on me before, so I honestly wasn't sure what to do next. The first thing I tried was turning the ignition again just to see if it would somehow restart. But the engine was completely dead. Nothing happened at all when I turned the key. I looked around and realized I had gotten stranded on a pretty isolated road. I knew exactly where I was since I had driven down the street many times for deliveries. But the nearest building that would still be open was a gas station about half a mile away. So first I called the customers at the house I was headed to and explained my car trouble situation. I let them know I unfortunately wouldn't be able to deliver their pizza. Then I called my boss at the pizza shop and gave him a heads up that my car died and have to call it a night. He wasn't very sympathetic, but basically told me to not worry about the undelivered pizza and to just get my car taken care of. That gave me a small bit of relief knowing I didn't have to stress about completing that last delivery. But I still had no idea what I should actually do next, sitting there stranded on a dark country road in a dead car. I ended up calling my brother Matt, who lived about 40 minutes away in the suburbs. He was really the only person I could think to call who would actually still be awake this late at night. Matt picked up with a sleepy hello, and I immediately launched into explaining my situation. He let out a big sigh on the other end, clearly annoyed that I was asking for his help so late, but he agreed he could come pick me up and at least drop me back off at my apartment downtown. I gave him my exact location on the road and thanked him profusely before leaning back in my driver's seat, trying to get comfortable for the wait. After a few minutes of sitting in silence, I noticed the undelivered pizza still sitting in my passenger seat. Figuring it would be a waste to let it go to waste, I opened the box and helped myself to a couple slices. It was actually really dark in the car with the battery dead and no interior lights on, so I turned on my phone's flashlight and rested it on the center console to give me a bit of illumination. The glowing foam screen made the empty country road seem even eerier, but at least I could see well enough to eat my makeshift dinner. I had been waiting for about 15 minutes when I noticed a shadowy figure appear in the distance, slowly walking down the road toward my parked car. Immediately, I felt vulnerable out there alone on the abandoned street. I switched off my phone light, hoping if I sat still and quiet, the stranger would pass by without even noticing I was there. But as he approached, still several feet away, the man slowed his pace and turned his head, seeming to stare directly at my dark stationary vehicle. Before I could react, he abruptly changed course and started walking right toward my driver's side door. I sat there paralyzed, watching his silhouette draw nearer in the moonlight. He came within a couple feet of my door and stopped, seemingly inspecting my car now up close. Then to my terror, he leaned in and knocked loudly on my window as if wanting me to roll it down. Of course, without the battery, I couldn't operate the electric windows or locks. "I can't roll it down, my car died," I shouted nervously, making sure he could hear me through the glass. The man leaned down and peered in with squinted eyes, looking offended. "Come on, girlie, how about giving me a lift up to the gas station?" he asked, jabbing a finger up the road. His gruff voice made me shudder. This is when I started to get a very uneasy feeling about this guy. It was pretty dang obvious my car had broken down, so I knew he had to be up to something shady. When I didn't respond, he knocked again harder. "Hello? Come on, help a guy out?" he demanded angrily. I just sat there frozen, watching him and hoping that ignoring him would make him simply walk away. But the man only got more aggressive, pounding hard on my roof and yelling that I'd better open up. And suddenly he went silent and still. A chill went down my spine as I saw him slowly step toward my door handle and grab it tightly. My whole car jolted violently as he tried with all his might to rip the door open. I was panicking now, unsure what to do. I looked around desperately for something I could use to defend myself. The only thing I spotted was a small screwdriver in my glove box. I grabbed it with a shaky hand, though I knew it would be useless against this angry stranger. At this point, the man had pulled out a pocket knife and started stabbing it forcefully around my window, as if trying to either break the glass or force the window down manually. He managed to make a few deep scratches and chips in the glass as I sat there frozen in terror. Then he wedged the knife into the top corner of the window and pushed with all his weight, slowly forcing the window to slide down a couple inches as it cracked and splintered around the point of entry. I found my voice and began screaming at him at the top of my lungs, begging and pleading for him to leave me alone. But I knew out here on this abandoned road, there was no one around to hear my cries for help. For over a minute, the man continued trying everything to bust into my car, pure rage filling his eyes now. But suddenly he stopped himself. He stood there for a moment, silent and breathing heavily, as if trying to regain composure. Then, to my horror, he bent down and pushed his face right up against the damaged window pane, glaring at me menacingly. Our eyes were just inches apart, separated by a thin sheet of fractured glass. I saw nothing but evil intentions in his fiery gaze. After holding my mortified stare for a few more seconds, he reared back and slammed his fist into the car door one last time with a bellow of frustration. Then, without another word, he whirled around and took off running back down the dark road and out of sight, leaving me hyperventilating alone in my car. About 10 minutes later, my brother finally arrived and I shakily showed him the splintered window, scratches and dents left on my car door by the angry stranger. Matt sped me back home to my apartment without delay. On the way, we called the police to report the entire terrifying encounter. I'd never felt such paralyzing fear for my life as I did stranded on that road, at the mercy of that vicious man. In my dreams, I still see his livid eyes staring through the glass, filled with violent intentions. His savage persistence to get inside my car continues to haunt me. But the most chilling part that I can't erase from my mind is the pure evil I saw in his eyes during that split second, with our faces just inches apart. Separated by a thin barrier of fractured glass, I had found myself face to face with a monster. A monster who was ready and eager to commit horrific brutality upon me as I sat trapped and defenseless. I quit my delivery job the very next day, no longer feeling safe driving those dark roads alone late at night. I still get panic attacks just remembering how close I came to whatever sinister fate that angry stranger had planned for me. Story 3. It was my junior year of college, and I was working part-time at a small 24-hour restaurant in the town of Athens, Georgia called Patty's Place. We were open until 1 a.m. most nights. Most customers would either come in to order food or call ahead for pickup. But every once in a while, someone would request delivery. I'd always enjoyed doing the late-night food deliveries because it allowed me to get away from the restaurant for a bit and drive around while still getting paid. Plus, the tip money from the deliveries was usually pretty decent. One night around midnight, we received a small delivery order for a customer who lived about 15 minutes away. This would be my last delivery before my shift ended. I got in the car with the food and entered the address into the GPS. The navigation prompted me to get on the nearby highway ramp that would lead most directly to the customer's residential neighborhood. As I approached the entrance ramp, I noticed a car coming quickly down the ramp toward me from the highway. Even from a distance, I could tell by the brightness of its headlights that it was moving at high speed. But I had to merge onto the highway lane, so I slowly eased into the rightmost lane and continued my acceleration. Suddenly, the fast-approaching car from behind me switched from the middle lane into the far right lane directly behind me, practically slamming on its brakes as it swerved dangerously close to my bumper. What the hell is wrong with this guy? I thought to myself, shaken by the reckless and threatening driving. I figured the driver must be drunk or just some idiot trying to scare me for fun. But after a few minutes, the car continued tailing right behind me, making no attempts to pass or exit the highway. At this point, I had no idea what he was trying to accomplish other than putting both of our lives at risk. My exit was coming up in about a mile, so I just hoped the driver would lose interest once I got off the highway. But of course, as I took the exit to the residential neighborhood, the car followed suit and tailed me into the side streets. I turned onto Elm Street, the road the customer lived on according to the GPS. As we got deeper into the dark neighborhood, the car behind me suddenly killed all its headlights and was now just a shadowy object in my rearview mirror. Now I was really starting to panic. I've had annoyed drivers follow me briefly after I accidentally cut them off before. But this was taking it to a whole new level, and I hadn't done anything to this guy. The customer's house was just down the street now, so I figured I'd pull quickly into their driveway and try to get the food into their hands as fast as possible so I wouldn't be alone outside. As I rapidly turned into the driveway on the right side of the house, I realized too late that this was a mistake. The dark car whipped into the driveway right behind me, blocking me in. Before I could even put my car in park, the other driver flung his door open aggressively. A disheveled-looking man leaped out and stumbled toward my car, screaming gibberish and waving his arms around violently. I couldn't make out most of what he was saying, but his speech was heavily slurred. He was clearly very intoxicated. The man reached my window and began banging on it furiously with his fist. As terrified as I was still fairly confident I could handle the situation since he was so inebriated. But then he suddenly pulled out a small pocket knife from his jacket and started stabbing at my window wildly with it. That was enough to jolt me into action. I swiftly threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the driveway with a screech, not even bothering to check behind me. The crazed man chased after my car for a short distance as I sped off, still brandishing the knife and shouting incoherently. I drove a few blocks over and pulled up alongside a dark house, catching my breath. I quickly called the customers I was supposed to be delivering to. To my relief, they answered right away. They immediately asked if I was okay in a concerned tone. Apparently, they had been watching the scary scene unfold from their living room window. I let them know I was fine and asked if the deranged man was still out front of their house. Thankfully, he had left the area, so I was able to return and safely get them their food. When I got back to the restaurant and told my coworkers about the harrowing experience, none of them really believed me. Honestly, I couldn't blame them. The whole incident was just so bizarre and surreal. I didn't end up reporting the incident since it was over so quickly and I escaped unharmed. But it definitely shook me up. To this day, I still feel a chill down my spine whenever I pass that neighborhood on a late-night food delivery route. Who knows what might have happened if I hadn't been able to hit the gas in time, or if that angry drunk's knife had managed to pierce the glass.